Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for May 16th, 2025. It's Friday, so I'm going to take some questions. I'm going to pose the first question myself, which is, did we just see a shift to diplomacy by the Trump trip to the Middle East and the move toward a negotiated agreement between Ukraine and Russia? Well, there are a number of aspects of this which are positive, but there are many more questions which have yet to be answered. I think the most important is the rejection of the idea of the unipolar order, which is that U.S. military force could impose a situation where nation building could take place. This was the policy of the George W. Bush administration, Obama, and Biden. The idea that somehow you can establish democracies based on the imposition of force. It's provably false. It cannot work. And the rejection of that idea by Trump explicitly, he denounced the idea of nation building. That's a step forward. But it leaves many, many other unanswered questions. So I have from several of you a request that I go through what the net effect is of this trip that Trump took to the Middle East. Now, I don't have the final effects of it because it was just concluded today. But the repudiation of the nation-building fantasy is the most important, I think, development. Now, there was also the consolidation of an agreement with the Houthis in Yemen that the U.S. will stop the bombing and they'll stop attacking U.S. ships in the Red Sea. That's an incomplete solution, but we'll see where that goes. Secondly, lifting the Syria sanctions. Well, that's, I would say, in general, a step forward to reject the idea of threats by sanctions in order to achieve agreements. But it still leaves in place the fact that the president is continuing to threaten sanctions against Iran and against Russia, among others, and China. So that's an incomplete step. Now, the nuclear negotiations with Iran represent a very significant, important step, and the president once again indicated that there's progress and he's hopeful that these could avoid a war. Again, the problem with the Houthis, though, in Yemen, it doesn't address the cause of the crisis, which is that the Houthis have said they do not accept the attacks on Gaza from Israel. And unfortunately, President Trump did not address that in the visit to the Middle East. Now, neither did he address the escalation by Netanyahu, which we were told would not take place until he left the region, but it actually has been underway, with hundreds killed in the last days. The refusal to lift the blockade of aid, and the reports, credible reports, that up to a half of the population of Gaza is threatened with starvation and disease from the blockade. The other part of this is there were military deals, business deals, but most of this was revolved around the military defense sector. Airplanes, weapon systems, artificial intelligence, and especially given the presence of Palantir, artificial intelligence for data collection, and also related to military defense contracts. So that's why it's incomplete, and the most important omission was the refusal, the inability or unwillingness to directly address Netanyahu's escalation and the failure to come out on behalf of the establishment of a Palestinian state. That omission, which would have moved things much further ahead, is an indication that there's still a fear of taking on the Zionist lobby in the Congress and the recognition that the Netanyahu regime is not susceptible to any kind of pressure. Well, that's the only way you're going to get peace in the Middle East. Now, I want to bring up a second question that's come from a number of you, which is the split between those who favor a one-state solution for Palestine as opposed to those who still want a two-state solution. The idea of the two-state solution comes from the United Nations, which was a result of the partition plan by the British to establish two separate states. The problem is that the land that was initially allocated for the Palestinians has been dramatically encroached upon by the settler movement in Israel. That is, that you don't have an ability to have a contiguous state, that it's broken up by the establishment of settlements, checkpoints, military operations from Israel. And so the idea that this could be a coherent state has been dramatically set back. And this is what the Israelis call facts on the ground. And that's been the policy of virtually every Israeli government since the 1967 war. So you don't have enough land to establish the conditions for a successful state. So perhaps a one-state solution would work. And this is increasingly favored by a number of sensible people in Israel who basically say that the only way to establish peace is through some form of democratic parliamentary system. There's a problem, which is demographics. If you're going to have a democracy and you have two different groupings with different opinions, how do you resolve it? How do you have a parliament which reflects a national mission that's acceptable to both the Palestinian side and the Israeli side? Well, they say either you have a democracy or you have chaos. And so the problem is you have to go to a higher solution. And this is where the work of Lyndon LaRouche comes in. A higher solution means you have to have a basis for peace, which is an economic agreement, which will provide benefits to all people there, whether it's a one-state or two-state. You have on the one side the Oslo Plan and the Arab League Plan of 2002, which called for trading land for peace. That is, the land that was occupied since the 1967 war becomes a bargaining chip to offer to the Palestinians in return for a full recognition of the State of Israel. Well, if that were to occur, the next step then is how do you have a viable state if you still have control in the hands of the Israeli military? And obviously you don't have a viable state. And what's necessary then is to have an economic policy which represents the interests of both populations, or all populations, not just in Palestine and Israel, but more broadly through the Arab world. This is not just a question of money. It's a question of thinking about the future and what the role of the countries of the Middle East or Southwest Asia could be. That was the intent of LaRouche's idea of the Oasis Plan. You solve the problem of the shortage of water and power. At the same time, you make this a viable crossroads for connection between Eurasia, Europe, and Africa. That's the only way you can actually foresee the existence of one or two states in Palestine that serve the broader purposes of harmony and peace in the world. Now, you can debate all you want these various questions, but unless you have an economic solution, you're going to have a fight for control of land, control of ports and water, which will ultimately lead to chaos and war. So it's from this standpoint that you have to judge what was the importance or the significance of the Trump visit. And by refusing to address the genocide in Gaza, refusing to discuss the question of the two-state solution, or a resolution of the Palestinian problem, which doesn't include slaughtering the Palestinians, it's a missed opportunity. And the Middle East has for many, many years been subject to one missed opportunity after another by design. The design of the post-World War I Middle East was a British-French direction to maintain control of the great powers over the region. This has not been resolved. The French still insist on their territorial responsibility in Lebanon. The British, through the Netanyahu regime, use Israel as a battering ram against the BRICS, against the potential for a harmony of interests between nations involved in multipolar agreements. So unless you address the higher question, which is the long-term effects of a British plan for clash of civilizations, disruptions, identity, politics, and so on, unless you address that, there's no simple solution. And sale of jets to the region, of artificial intelligence, may make money for the war parties, but it's not going to solve the problem. That's what we'll be discussing at the Schiller Institute conference at the end of May, May 24th and 25th. There'll be a link in the description section so you can register for that conference. Panel 3 will be on the Oasis Plan and the Middle East. And we'll have a number of very interesting presentations. I'll be doing a presentation there. I'd urge you to sign up today. Use the link to sign up to participate in the conference. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for your questions. Let's make this period ahead one where the forces of peace can prevail based on these higher solutions implicit in the idea of physical economy of